Welcome to the Darkstream. Happy Independence Day. Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com, and Infogalactic. To paraphrase Public Enemy, as you know about Google, Google has doodles, but we've got doodles too. If you go to Infogalactic, you can see our Independence Day, whatever we're going to end up calling them, on Infogalactic. Now, for me, this is not a holiday we celebrate over here in Europe, obviously. And I find Independence Day always a little bit bittersweet because, while I celebrate the ideals of the American Revolution, it's very clear to anyone who's paid attention to the history of the Revolutionary War, the ideals of the revolutionaries and the Founding Fathers, the rights of Englishmen, and the purpose of the U.S. Constitution. All of those things have failed. The USA is no longer a nation. The USA no longer belongs to the American people. Most people who are U.S. citizens are not Americans by any definition that the founders would have understood. And the nation has been replaced with an empire. And the empire is showing cracks. The empire is failing, and it is failing fast. But there is hope. Both as Christians and as Americans, you are by nature called to hope. Hope is in your soul, and hope is in your blood. The reason is, like I say, when people talk about, Christianity is failing, Christianity is doomed, there are fewer Christians and so forth, I always say all we need is 12. There were 12 apostles, and they rocked the world. As far as Americans go, the Founding Fathers, the American revolutionaries, managed to defeat the most powerful empire on earth. They managed to build something new, and the fact that they didn't plan perfectly for the future, the fact that it fell apart on them, the fact that it was essentially destroyed. The voluntary association of states was destroyed in 1865. Now you can talk about whether the Civil War was caused by slavery or whether it was about secession or whatever. I'm not concerned about that. We're not talking about that. The one thing that is perfectly clear is that in 1865, the concept of the voluntary association of the several states ceased to be. What had been the United States of America ended up becoming the forcibly imposed empire of the United States. The forcibly imposed empire of states. Now, of course, they didn't call it that. Wasn't very good rhetoric. But, in 1865 is when the USA ceased to be America. Now, that doesn't mean that it was the worst. A lot of people overreact to these things. Just because something ceased to be ideal, just because something ceased to be as good as it had been, does not make it the worst place in the world. Even today, for all of its flaws, the USA is still a decent place to live. I don't think it's the best place in the world to live. If I did, I would live there. I left. Didn't want to live there. Didn't want to bring up my children there. But it's still a decent place to live. And so, unless you've traveled around the world, unless you know the difference between Thailand and Bangladesh and Japan and Switzerland and England and all these sorts of things, you can't possibly realize how good you have it in the United States, how good you have it in parts of the West. And so, I'm not saying these things. I'm not saying these things to be negative. I'm saying these things to be realistic so that you understand that things are not as what they were. No, I would not say that we've never had it so good. The USA had it better in the 50s. Yes, you didn't have the internet, but as far as as a society went, it was generally better for most people. And, ironically, it was actually better for blacks. It was definitely better for whites, and so forth. So, and of course, that was a result of the 1924 Immigration Act that basically shut down all immigration, except for some white European countries, and it protected the demographic balance of the United States. And so that was ruined in 1965. The three dates that most matter for the destruction of the original United States are 1865, when the voluntary association ceased, 1913, when the income tax and the Federal Reserve Act came in, and then 1965, when the Immigration Act overturned that 1924 policy and laid the groundwork for the demographic destruction of the United States. So that's the situation, right? But what do we have now that we have not had since those days of, since that 1924 period? What we have, I would argue, is potentially the greatest president since Calvin Coolidge. Donald Trump, already, after only a few months in office, is already the greatest president since Calvin Coolidge. This is exciting. Do you realize what he did this week? What is the media talking about? Tell me what the media is talking about with regards to the president. What is the one thing that the media is actively discussing? They're talking about his tweets. That's correct. He put up a tweet about CNN, and that's all the media is talking about. Now, how many of you, don't do any hearts yet. Just stop doing the hearts. You're not following directions very well. How many of you have heard of the Johnson Amendment from 1954? How many of you know what that is? And it doesn't count if you just read about it on my blog or John Wright's blog. Okay, what the God Emperor just did is he overturned the 1954 Johnson Amendment, which basically threatened churches with prosecution if they said anything about politics. So what he just did is restored First Amendment protections to the Christian church. He just opened the gateway for Christians to get active in politics through their churches. And that means potentially unleashing the power of the Christian church in the USA. Now, this is something that no conservative Republican president dared to do. This is funny. What about the separation of church and state? That's to protect the church. The Johnson Amendment was a violation of the separation of church and state. Congress shall pass no law. So, what Trump is doing is he's restoring the rights of Englishmen. He is restoring the protections of the Constitution to the Christian church in America. This is massive. Or at least, this is potentially massive. Now, don't you think that's a little bit more important than a tweet about CNN? Don't you think that has potentially longer-term impact than a little meme? And isn't it amazing that good Christian presidents, good conservative Christians, like Ronald Reagan, like George Bush, like George W. Bush, like Richard Nixon, like Gerald Ford, like Dwight Eisenhower, none of those good conservative Christian men overturned the Johnson Amendment. They were all content, even Reagan, half put into office by the sweep of the moral majority. Even George Bush, who was pushed forward by the Christian coalition. Those guys didn't do a damn thing. And yet, the God Emperor of the alt-right, the guy with the orange hair, divorced multiple times, extramarital affairs, all this sort of thing. He is the guy who did what those other good Christian conservatives wouldn't do, and he freed the churches and freed the Christians in America. Now, this is why I'm telling you that Donald Trump is already a better president than Ronald Reagan was at the same point in time of his presidency. Now, I'm not saying that Donald Trump is going to continue on this path. I don't know what the future will bring. But what we can see that he is doing is that he is actively working to do what he said, which is make America great again. I mean, there's a lot of complications here. He's under tremendous pressure from the neocons. He's under tremendous pressure from the globalists in his own administration. He's under tremendous pressure, not just pressure, he's in a difficult position internationally. North Korea now has a frickin' ICBM. North Korea is going to be able to hit the U.S. West Coast very soon if they can't do it already. So that means that he is going to have to do something about, he is most likely going to have to do something about North Korea. I said back in April, you can look it up, I said back in April that the whole thing about Syria and lobbing missiles and all that sort of thing was actually a distraction from Korea. I could tell something happened. That not only freaked out the Trump administration, but actually freaked out the Chinese and Russia, Japan, all those countries. What was it? I'm guessing it was what we saw today. It was the fact that the news had leaked out that North Korea was on the verge of having ICBMs that would bring Beijing, Moscow, and the United States within range of their nuclear weapons. Now, I don't know that they're going to do anything about it, but certainly if you look at where things are on the map, I think, this is just my supposition, I think that the U.S. is going to provide air and logistical support to a Chinese attack on North Korea. That's my thought. I'm not saying it will happen. I have absolutely no information that you don't have. But when I look at the pieces that are being set up, when I look at the chessboard, that's what it looks like to me. So I think that, and then also, here's the other thing, by the way. What happened in April when he lobbed those missiles in Syria? Do you guys remember who he was meeting with at the time? Who was Donald Trump meeting at the time? He was meeting with the Chinese premier. I don't know how to pronounce it, but Z or whatever. Now, who is he meeting with this week? He's meeting with Vladimir Putin. Now, don't you think that if you're going to arrange to do something in military alliance with China, you're probably going to want to make sure that Russia knows all about it and is on board with it? So I strongly suspect that what is going to happen, what's going on right now, is that the U.S.-Chinese alliance against North Korea has already been arranged, and now now Trump is informing Russia of what's going on, because they do not want, they need to have Russia's okay with this. The thing you need to remember is that the U.S.-Russian relationship is a little bit uncomfortable right now. Much better than it was, but it's still very uncomfortable thanks to what's going on in Syria. Russia is not our enemy. But it is also very important. Oops, I blocked the wrong one. Sorry about that. I'll unblock you later. But China and Russia have historically been at loggerheads too. And so, you do the U.S. If the U.S. were to team up with China, hang on, another one where that came. So, if the U.S. were to team up with China, that is going to naturally worry the Russians, and so it's very important for them to be on board with what's going on. Here's another one. So, what do I make of the latest saber rattling in Syria? What did I say the last time something happened in Syria? Whenever there's stuff going on in Syria, that means something's about to happen in North Korea. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was a little flurry of military activity focused on Syria. Possibly there might even be some saber rattling between the U.S. and Russia in Syria. That may actually be what Putin and Trump will be arranging. We'll have to see. But you need to keep in mind that anyone with half a brain is not going to just go, hey everyone, here we go, we're all going to do this. You need to take people by surprise. The North Koreans are very aware of this, so we'll see what happens. But that is my read. But let's get back to the comparison between Trump and Reagan. What was Reagan's big achievement? What was the big achievement that he made? It wasn't the wall. The wall actually came down under George Bush. Reagan's big achievement was winning the Cold War. And that was an achievement, even though it was bound to happen. It was guaranteed to happen. But he had massive, massive failures like the 1986 amnesty, which, worsened the problem from the 1965 Immigration Act. So, so far, imagine with what Trump has already done in the first few months, imagine if he's able to create an alliance with China and defang North Korea. Given the nukes involved, that is something that compares, I would argue, favorably with winning the Cold War. Winning the Cold War, even though we didn't realize it at the time, but because of the economics involved, that was basically a gimme. So, the key thing is, and ISIS has already been defeated. What did Trump say would happen? He said ISIS would be defeated. What did they announce out of Iraq? They announced that the caliphate had been destroyed. ISIS, the organization, still exists, but its purpose has just been wiped out. So the caliphate is no more. And that means that all of their PR, all of their enthusiasm and so forth is gone. Now you can say, well, Trump can't take credit for defeating them because it was the Russians and it was the Iranians and so forth. Well, guess who allowed them to do it? Under Obama, the U.S. was actively preventing the Russians, the Iranians, Hezbollah, and the Syrians to do that. Okay, this True Floridian has to go. Look, this is not a medium for you to debate with other commenters, okay? Just so you're aware. I don't understand why people like tune into this so that they can try to argue with somebody else. So, anyhow, we will see what happens. But I think you can be encouraged on this Independence Day because even though we live in difficult times, the United States has what may end up being a man capable of meeting the challenges of the times. It's too soon. It's too soon to be sure. But the initial signs are far more promising than most of you realize. Think about it. Most of you didn't even know what the Johnson Amendment is, weren't paying any attention to it because the media wasn't covering it. And yet, Donald Trump not only backed up his campaign promise, but also managed to free the Christian church to engage in politics in America. Now, there's a lot more that needs to be done. He has got to build the wall. He has got to avoid war with Russia. There's an awful lot that still needs to be done. But let's face it, it's a pretty good start. So go out there, celebrate freedom, liberty in America. Have a good time, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.